Konnichiwa, and welcome to the first JHRS hosted webinar for 2016. I'm your moderator, Junka Bigting, and I'm the Chief Community Officer of the Japan HR Society and the Managing Editor of the HR Agenda, Japan's first and only bilingual HR magazine since 2011. Today, we are very pleased to let you know that we have more than 40 participants registered for this webinar. Most of our participants today is obviously from Japan, but we do have people coming from Australia, Canada, US, Singapore, and the Philippines joining us today. I would also like to acknowledge my former students at TUJ and Globis who are at this call. Thank you for joining us, and I'm glad that you are furthering your HR education beyond the classroom. Okay, before we start, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping here. First, in order to ensure the quality of our webinar today, all participants will be on mute mode only for the duration of this webinar. However, you can, of course, participate in the discussion by using the chat function. You can see it on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, simply type them in the chat box, and I, as your moderator, will do my best to have our speaker address them during or after the webinar itself. Note that our speaker has agreed to provide all webinar participants a copy of the presentation slides, as well as the link to the video of this webinar for your own personal use. JHRS will be sending the relevant links after the webinar, so please watch out for it. Okay, before we start, let me just have a couple of advertisements here because we do have some JHRS events that you might want to attend as well. The nearest one is the Win Tokyo Conference 2016 to be held at the gorgeous Shangri-La Hotel from May 19 to 20. We have been participating in this Win Tokyo Conference since they started to do this 2 years ago, and I can testify that the quality of speakers, participants, and the conference itself is really, really high. This conference is highly recommended, especially for those of you who would like to learn what other companies are doing in terms of diversity and inclusion and creating a highly engaged and empowered workplace. Don't forget as well that you can get, as a webinar participant today, you can get a 10,000 yen discount for registering as a JHRS member or as an HRA subscriber. And then the second one is in our calendar is the mother of all conferences. This is the SHRM 2016 Annual Conference and Exposition, the biggest HR conference in the world, to be attended by more than 15,000 delegates all over the world. It will be held in Washington, D.C. from June 19 to 23, and JHRS is forming its own delegation to represent Japan in this conference. And to date, we have around 10 confirmed delegates coming from different companies and organizations. If you are planning to attend this conference, become part of the JHRS delegation and enjoy up to a 40% discount in conference fees. As usual, the HR Agenda magazine will be covering this event and update you with YouTube videos we will produce as we cover this particular conference. And finally, JHRS and the HR Agenda will again be participating in the 5th annual of the HR Agenda Conference to be held at the Asante Convention Center in Singapore from August 22 to 24 and organized by our partner Marcus Evans. I'm actually one of the concurrent session speakers there, and I'm going to talk about a similar topic as our webinar today, and it's called Transforming Performance Management, the use of rating-free performance management. Again, as to register as a JHRS member, you can also get a 10% discount when attending this conference. And that's it. It's now we go to the main webinar itself, and at this point I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker for today is one of the world's foremost experts on the topic of performance management and a fierce advocate of the abolition of performance review itself in developing people. Our speaker is the founder and managing director of a performance and change management consultancy, Winners at Work, based in Brisbane, Australia. And he is also an adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Management at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. In the course of doing his advocacy against the use of performance reviews, he has delivered his message to thousands and thousands of people across a dozen or so countries and territories, and has authored 7 books, the latest of which is an Amazon bestseller, The End of Performance Review. And so without further ado, JHRS is proud to present Dr. Tim Baker, as we say, And as we say here in Japan, Dr. Baker, yoroshiku onegaishimasu. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, June, and welcome to the webinar. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you this afternoon and perhaps providing you with some thought-provoking commentary around performance management generally. And as June has mentioned, you are more than welcome to ask me questions through the chat box. And June, as the moderator, will let me know. So I'll stop at different points to make it a little bit more interactive. When I do this work in performance, essentially I find that there are three camps of people, and the three camps are this. One camp believes that the performance review is a good thing, it should remain, and they believe that the only problem is perhaps training people to do it better. So that's one camp. There's another camp who believe that performance reviews are fine just as they are, and there's nothing wrong with it, and they have the attitude, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So there's a second group. Now that group, of course, is getting smaller and smaller, and the third group, which is the camp that I belong to, is that this camp believes that performance reviews are not working and that we need to find another way. So that camp, of course, is growing in size. And in fact, just to illustrate my point, in a moment I'll just talk about some of the companies that are actually in that third camp. So basically there are three key messages that I want to get out of today's webinar and broadcast. So the first key message is that to understand why performance reviews are outdated and ineffective. Now, I've had a look at the attendance list, and there's many very experienced people who are in this chat room. So I think this is probably something that you are probably aware of as well. The big dilemma is, what do we replace it with? The second thing is, I think there should be a shift from moving away from appraising performance to developing performance. I think it's impossible to do both in that one big meeting that we have once a year or twice a year, which we call a performance review. You can't really do both. And of course what we do is we try to do both, and in fact what happens is that because we have this big review once or twice a year, people don't bother doing any developmental work during the year, thinking they can save it all up for the big event. And I guess the third thing that I want you to get out of today's presentation is actually understand one of the methodologies that are out there to replace the performance review, which is the 5 conversations framework. There are other methodologies out there, and I think what you'll find is that group is growing and growing. There are more and more possibilities out there for you to use. So I just ask you to keep an open mind, ask questions, and have some fun, and hopefully I can provoke you a little bit into thinking slightly differently about the whole subject. Okay, so all of these companies, of course, have got something in common. We all recognise them, we all recognise their names, they're multinational companies, but they've all done one thing, and they have decided to review their performance review. They have decided to actually take out the, so some of them have taken out the rating systems, others of them have abolished performance reviews completely, and they're using hybrid approaches, but they're all attempting to look for a new way forward. So obviously there's a movement out there towards more of a performance conversation model. I think that I just might start by making this comment, if I may, and if you think about it, we rate people, and my comment about that is that if we want employees working together, not competing with one another, then towards moving towards a common goal, removing ratings is a good starting point. So by creating ratings, we're getting people, of course, to compete with each other. So that's fine, but then on the other hand, we're preaching teamwork and collaboration on the other. That's two very confusing messages, and obviously people get confused in that paradox. So, I mean, that's one reason why we might actually think about looking at things differently. The other thing about ratings that's interesting is that often I find that people, particularly in this part of the world, will give people a rating in the middle. So, for example, if you've got a like it rating of 1 to 5, it's not unusual for people to actually have a rating of, say, 3. So what that does is the manager can sort of feel safe. They're not giving them a 4 or a 5, and they're not giving them a 1 or a 2. And really, what happens is that the employee actually learns nothing from that. In fact, it's best not to actually give solid feedback. So I think there's a lot of problems with ratings. The other thing about ratings is that they're not objective. They're not, I mean, we might think they're objective, but they're not, because they're based on our own particular observations. So ratings aren't necessarily the be-all and end-all. I understand that many of you have talent management programs in place in your organisations, and you use ratings in order to, you know, distinguish various levels of talent. I understand that, and I think in some senses I can completely empathise with why you would do that. But using ratings instead of giving people feedback, I use the example a bit like this. If you're going to the gym, I would say that I have two choices. If I had a trainer who was going to give me a rating out of 5 at the end of my workout, and a trainer who was going to actually work with me and give me feedback all the way through, which one would I prefer? Well, of course, I'd prefer the latter, because I'm getting instant, just-in-time feedback. The one that gives me a 4 out of 5 doesn't tell me much, except the fact that I'm probably doing better than average, in their mind at least. So I think there's a lot of problems with ratings, personally. So let's move on. I interviewed, well, when I say interviewed, my research, I spoke to 1,400 managers in this part of the world. This is Australia, New Zealand, parts of Southeast Asia. I simply wanted to, and they were all HR managers, and I actually asked them the question, if there was one concern that you had about your current performance appraisal system, what would it be? So what I was attempting to do is just try and find out what people were concerned about with the whole process and the rating systems and such. So let's have a look at some of those concerns, and I've clustered them into themes. So one of the concerns, and these aren't necessarily in any order, so I just want to run through them very quickly because it paints a very clear picture of what's wrong with the current system that we've got. People commented that they're very costly, and they do take time, and it does cost money because time is money. People have to prepare. People come to this meeting. While they're at the meeting, of course, they can't be doing other things, so there are opportunity costs for appraisals, and it can be quite a costly exercise. That in itself is not a problem. The problem really is, okay, if it's a costly exercise, is it worth the cost? Are we getting a return on investment? Another concern is that appraisals can be destructive. I've had HR managers telling me that after the appraisal, their work really begins because there are many disputes around the office, there are many arguments, there are allegations of bullying, harassment, and all of these kinds of things. Whether they're true or not is one thing, but the fact that they can descend into a mistrust between the manager and the employee is a major concern. Another concern is that they're a monologue rather than a dialogue. In other words, the manager is doing all the talking and the employee does very little because he or she knows that their pay is probably very much contingent on how they respond. So it's very difficult to get people to talk during the appraisals. That was the common theme that came through. Another concern was that it was very formal. It's usually done in the boss's office behind the big black big desk and done in a very stressful environment. And that in itself was not conducive to actually having a good conversation. Another concern was that they're too infrequent, so a lot of companies, of course, have gone from annual reviews to biannual, and then some are actually going quarterly. So there was still a concern that it's too infrequent because a lot of things can change, obviously, in months and several months. So that was a big concern that was raised. One of the biggest concerns was the fact that the exercise was an exercise in form filling. So people would actually be spending all of their time filling out forms. And in fact, one of the HR managers I spoke to directly said to me that during their appraisals, there were managers who never made eye contact with the particular people that they were appraising for the full hour because they were too busy filling out the paperwork. So that cannot be useful and productive. So paperwork and the bureaucracy that goes with that can be a major turn-off for managers and employees and HR managers as well. Another concern is that they're rarely followed up. So it's quite a stressful situation. People finish, they file them away either electronically or via paper, and they don't refer to them again until the next appraisal. So very little happens. And in fact, I've done some looking on this regard, and I have not yet come across one piece of credible research that actually demonstrates conclusively that performance appraisals actually increase performance. So the question then is, why do we do it? The last concern is, and I've sort of covered this, is that most people find it stressful. Not only does the person on the receiving end find it stressful, the manager themselves finds it stressful. So there's a big concern there. And so the fact that it's stressful is not a major issue. Some stress is critical in the workplace, but unnecessary stress is not necessary. So why do we do it? So these were the 8 concerns that HR people, this is 1,400 managers, HR managers that I spoke to. So you'd be familiar with many of those. So let's, I might just move on then, and then I'll pause for some questions. If you've got some questions, then please put them in the chat box. I guess what I'll do here is just give a broad landscape of what's out there at the moment. So what's actually available to you? At one end of the continuum, we've got the very traditional approach, and we've got in the middle a discussion type approach, and then at the other end we've got the peer group approach, which is fairly new based on the crowdsourcing concept. So let's just look very briefly at where each of these, what these mean, and where does the 5 conversations framework fit in. The traditional approach is very much based on the military concept, where the superior sits down with the subordinate and basically then asks them a bunch, basically gives them feedback, and the subordinate really accepts or rejects that feedback, but really they're passive observers in the process. The discussion one is where trust is critically important. So this is about developing a dialogue between the person being appraised and the appraiser. So what my concept, the 5 conversations framework, attempts to do is to actually create a discussion. So we're actually shifting from the traditional to the discussion. Now, something that's relatively new and I've had a bit of experience with is the peer group approach. How the peer group approach actually works is that, say for example, you've got 6 in a team, 5 of those peers will actually rate or assess the 6th person confidentially, and that creates a report, and then the manager or the team leader would go through that report with each particular person of the team. So basically the theory behind that is that the employees are accountable to their team members as much as they are their manager. So that's a very interesting concept. So the traditional one's based on hierarchy and power. So basically the decision that's made by the appraiser is the one that counts. For the discussion, it's about agreement. So for example, if I rate someone a 4, they might rate themselves a 2, their score is a 3. So it's a kind of coming to some sort of an agreement around where we go. Although I should stress the 5 conversations framework does not use ratings. And in terms of the peer group approach, there's obviously multiple perspectives that we get from the team members and sometimes beyond the team itself. So the manager's judgment is used in this approach here with the management judgment. The management makes the call, they make the observation. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but nevertheless their judgment counts. With the discussion approach, it's a mutual agreement. And with the peer group approach, it's a peer group judgment. So there's a kind of an aggregate result that comes from that. So you might like to actually think, if I just go back there for a moment, you might like to think, you know, where is your system along the continuum? Most people, of course, are trying to move away from the left-hand side towards the right-hand side. Some are having success, some are not, but certainly they're attempting to do that. So, at this stage, I might just pause and just put the camera back on, if I may. June, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and we do have a question from one of our attendees. And her question is: ratings are intended to serve as a base for comparison as a quantitative or objective tool, apples to apples. But how do we argue to naysayers that qualitative measurement, like continuous improvement, has a better effect?
I think the first message there in the question is that, look, and I know the person asking the question probably didn't mean it, but it's probably what other people think. They're not objective because obviously there's just a number that's based on a perception. And often that number is actually not even representative of what people's perception is, as I mentioned before. So that's the whole basis. That we feel safe with numbers because we feel that we're taking ourselves away from the real issue. I think that I would probably try to persuade people by talking to them in relation to what's more important, feedback, which is what you're referring to as qualitative, or is it the quantitative number? Now, they'll probably say both, in which case I'm not that concerned because what actually happens is that the number replaces the feedback. So in other words, if I give someone a number, I don't have to give them any feedback. I can just say, you're a 4. It excuses me from the important feedback. So I think that's the way I would try to do it. The numbers themselves are not critical. I understand they're comparative and they make judgments about people, but at the end of the day, it's the qualitative feedback that's critical. So that's the way I'd probably explain it to a manager.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Becker. That's a very interesting insight, especially on the idea that, on the perceived idea that performance management or performance appraisal is an objective exercise. So at this point, we don't have any questions yet, so perhaps you can proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
I'll continue. Okay, so let's continue. So that's the 3 different approaches. Now, what I want to do now is show you how the 5 conversation framework actually works. So what I've got here is a process, and you can see that there are 8 steps in the process. So what I'm going to do is lead you through this process. As I said before, there are other concepts out there. This is the one, obviously, that I've developed. It's proving to be very popular. There are companies all over the world using it right now, so it's obviously got some validity from that point of view. So let me go through and show you. The very first key step in this process is that we ask companies to populate a template. So what the template does is it gives us all the names, all the email addresses of everybody in the organisation. Why? Well, 2 reasons. We want to conduct a pre-conversation survey, and also that is used to populate the 5 conversations framework online system, which I'm not going to get into in great detail today, but I'll certainly talk with you offline if you're interested to look at that a bit further. Then what we do is we actually assess the current state. Now, this is important because what's actually happening is that no one really has any evidence about whether these systems actually work or not. And as I said before, there's no research to show that they actually do. So what the assessment does at the beginning is actually assess the organisation, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute, so that we have a baseline, and then we can move from that baseline a bit further. So we do that. So we've got the data to tell us how the organisation is faring, and look, the statements are not directly related to the 5 conversations framework, but they do guide and inform that particular process. Then we do some management training, and this is important. Managers need to understand, and when I say management training, this is anybody that's going to be conducting a conversation. So normally if you've got 100 people in an organisation, we're probably talking at least a third of the organisation that would be involved in a 2-hour training course. What this training does is give people some context, why we're doing it, how the system works, what the benefits are, and so forth. And pretty much some of the concepts we're covering now. There's an online system, as I mentioned, and the importance of the online system is so that the conversations can be recorded and monitored, and we can keep track of that important process. Then there's a round of the 5 conversations, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail at what these conversations look like. The next step, which is step 6, we're making an assumption that performance has actually increased. We don't know that for sure until we reassess the workplace. Then we have another round of the 5 conversations. So essentially what happens is that during the course of a year, it's expected that every leader will have 10 10-minute conversations with their particular team members. And I've had people say to me, well, we don't have time for that. And therein lies the problem, of course. If you show me a good leader, I will guarantee to you that they're having these conversations. So what we're trying to do is to actually get people to do what they should be doing anyway, which is, of course, having developmental conversations. And then what we do at the end is we assess the state again. And what we'll hopefully find is that there's been an improvement overall, and of course there's an impetus to say, this is working, can we continue? And trying to convince people to use systems like this can be very much done on the basis of evidence based on assessing the framework. So that's the broadly how the model actually works. I dare say people have some questions about that. I guess I just wanted to quickly, and I'm not going to explain how the circles here work because we don't have time, but I have given you a reference here. You can go and have a look at this methodology that I'm using. But what you will notice broadly is that we have these are the 5 conversations, and it broadly shows the level of congruence between top management, middle management, and workforce. So the advantage of this system is that we can stratify the organisation across departments and also vertically, so that we can do a top-down analysis as well. So I won't get bogged down into how all the circles work because that would take too long. Happy to talk with anyone and actually give you a demonstration, but at least there's a reference point there for you to go to at another point. So let me give you an example, and then June, I will pause and see if there's any other questions, but because I've covered a lot of territory here before I actually get into the 5 conversations. So here is a statement in the survey, just to give you an idea, a flavour. So this is opportunities for growth, which is the 3rd conversation in the framework. Here is a statement that is in the survey. Remember the pre-survey? This would be done twice, one before, one after. And the statement reads, I'm aware of each of my immediate team members' work-related deficiencies. So that's the question that top management answered. That's the question that middle management answered, but the workforce, which are down here in the green, they would have answered a slightly different question. Their question would have been, my manager is aware of my work-related deficiencies. So we've personalised it at this level. Still the same question, it's just looking at it from a different perspective. So you can see here, and this is a real live example, we had 33 workforce, 3 top managers, 5 middle managers. So the top management said, yep, we're very, very, very aware of work-related deficiencies in our members. Middle management said the same thing. So they're very confident, but it's interesting in this example that only 45% of people, 15 out of 33, could agree with that statement. What that basically reflects is the fact that, yes, it's probably true that the managers do understand the deficiencies, but they're not communicating it to the workforce. That's why the workforce isn't as confident about it. So you would expect after 2 rounds of the 5 conversations that these results probably won't change, hopefully, but the results in this level here will probably be more positive. In other words, you've got 45% of people sitting on the fence. They could neither agree nor disagree. So it's likely that some of those people would have to concede that my manager does know what my deficiencies are because we've had 2 conversations around that. So that's the sort of approach that we take. So I'll just put the webcam back on and bring June back into the conversation. Okay, so June, any questions?
All right, we do have another question before you. Yes, we do have a couple of questions here, but the first question would be certainly ongoing communication and coaching is the key to successful performance management. What do you think might be the challenges of a new approach that is implemented here in a country like Japan, which is I think the participant is trying to imply that we have a very high context type of culture here.
Yeah, I think that my comment about this is that I think for those of you who are in the HR field, I think you should look at the 5 conversations framework not as a substitute to the performance review. You should look at it as a change management initiative. So in other words, by implementing this, what you're doing is you're creating a situation where people are obliged to talk to each other, more so than they probably are. And I think that in itself is a big change, whether it's your culture in Japan or Australia. I can assure you in Australia, we struggle. Managers here are not coaching people. Managers here are not having conversations. I find in America the same thing. In fact, there's very few cultures in the world where people are doing this well. And what I'm trying to do here is put a framework in place to get people to do this. And ultimately what happens is their skill level will increase because we give them the questions to ask. It's not like they have to make it up. And I'll show you what some of those questions are. So hopefully, June, that answers the question. Look, I think humanity, all over the world, there's this huge yearning for a need to feel part of the organisation. Community is breaking down all over the world. Sometimes we don't even know who our neighbours are. We don't know who the person is across the hallway or across the road. So what happens is that people come to the workplace looking for some humanity, what I call workplace dignity. So the conversation framework is about creating that, as hard as that might be in some cases.
Okay. We just have one more additional question related to one of the slides that you earlier presented, and the question is, how is accountability assured in the peer group approach that you discussed in one of your slides.
Sorry, June, I just missed that last bit. Could you just read that out again? Thank you.
Yes, the question is how is accountability assured in the peer group approach?
Good, good. Okay, the accountability comes from the fact, okay, if you take the peer group approach process, I think what you're getting at is that maybe because it's anonymous, people can say whatever they want. My sense is that, look, there's no perfect answer to this. If you make it, if you don't make it anonymous, so in other words, you say, right, you're accountable, you make your comments, we will know what you think. The problem with that is that people aren't always frank, open and honest, right? So that's a problem because you're not getting the feedback you need. But then on the other hand, if you make it anonymous, then of course people can hide behind it and say, well, I didn't say that, or that wasn't about me. So all these systems have their flaws. There's no question about that. But I think that if you're sitting down having conversations with people, it is a far more genuine approach because you can check with people about their understanding. That'd be my comment.
All right. Thank you so much for that again. And perhaps at this stage we can proceed with your presentation.
Thanks, Jim. I'll continue.
Thank you.
Okay, so coming back to, so there's another example. We're just running a little bit, let's just quickly have a look at another one that comes out of the survey. My direct reports have made suggestions to me about ways to improve efficiencies and effectiveness in the organisation. You can see here that 100%, 60, 52. So not quite so positive at the team level. Now, you would expect with 2 rounds of the 5 conversations in a year that result would improve. So obviously continuous improvement is critically important in organisations. So one of the conversations is on innovation and continuous improvement for that very reason. All right, now look, this is a screenshot. I won't go into this in detail, but I just wanted to show you that there is an online system. There is an online system that assists people keeping track. You'll notice up here there's opportunities to send reminders, add team members, print the survey results. There's status reports, who's completed their conversations, who hasn't. You've got your team members here, where they are in the chain of a sequence of events. You've got opportunities to send them an email to remind them. You've got the opportunity here to actually create actions that can be sent back to your inbox. So there's a whole lot of things here that are very important. There's 2 issues that I've found that will prevent the 5 conversations framework from working. Indeed, any conversation framework. One of those is training. The leaders need to be committed. They need to understand what's required of them, so that's critically important. And the other concept is if you don't have some sort of a mechanism to administer it, what will happen is that busyness will get in the way. We all know about busyness. Busyness is the big excuse for us not to do the things that we really should be doing. So that's why I've developed the online system. So if you purchase my book, it doesn't make any comment about that. This has been developed subsequent to that. So I just want to make that point there, that there's a system in play. Now let me just talk a little bit around the philosophy, and then I'll stop again for a couple of questions, and then we'll stop at the end for the last 5 minutes to have any other round-up questions. So let me talk about the concept of the 5 conversations. Why do we have this system, and then I'll actually show you what it looks like, the framework of 5. This is a provocative statement, and some of you, this won't be terribly surprising, but for others of you, you may not have thought about it. But I think the roles that people play in organisations are more important than the jobs that they have. Yeah.
The PowerPoint slide is not appearing on the webcast.
Ah, okay. Okay, let me check to see. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Can you see it now?
Not yet. Right. Okay, now we can see it. Can you just hold back a little bit, especially the screenshot. I think that's the part that participants were not able to see.
Okay. I'll just quickly, should I go back, do you think, or just continue?
Just show them the screenshot and then just
Okay.
discuss a little.
Yeah, so you've got your system here, as I mentioned. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what happened there, but you've got a system here where you can, as you can see up the top, you've got a lot of facilities, print the questions. You've got a status report. You've got, you can add team members to your team. And this is a manager who has, their portal, which has 5 people. This is obviously made up. You've got 5 people here, the status, so their email addresses, when they were last contacted and so forth. So it makes it a lot easier. It makes it easy for HR people because you can actually judge where people are up to. All of this gets integrated back to HR. You've got actions down here which give people an opportunity to create a to-do list from the conversations and to actually send them back to their inbox. So you've got a lot of facilities there, but as any of you are interested, I'm more than happy to give you a demonstration online, but I just wanted to point out there is a system. Okay, so the roles that people play in organisations are more important than the jobs they do. What do I mean by that? Let me give you a little bit of an insight. If you think about the work that people do, and it doesn't matter what the work is, there's 2 dimensions to every work, all work that people do. One dimension we're very familiar with, and that's the technical dimension, or what I call the job role dimension. These are what basically are covered in the job description or position description, whichever term you want to use. Generally, this is a list of the technical requirements of what people are expected to do, the key performance indicators, the key result areas. Now, this is obviously important to any job, but there's a whole lot of other performance that's very, very important as well. And this is what I refer to as non-job roles that people have. And what I've done is I've identified 4 non-job roles in one of my books. You'll notice the book is down here. But let's have a look at what those 4 are. I would argue that they're critically important to performance. So having people come to work with a positive attitude and to be enthusiastic is critically important. I don't want people bouncing off the walls, but I don't want people actually being negative about everything because it sabotages the positivity in the workplace. That has a critical influence on performance. But yet we don't really talk about that because we don't have, it's not in the job description, and it might open up a big can of worms. So therefore we don't talk about it. Another role that's critically important is the role around the team. We expect people to be able to operate in teams, and that's critically important in our flatter structures. It's also critically important that people come to work and continuously learn and upgrade their skills. And I'm sure all of us in this broadcast would know people who have stopped learning. They've said, oh, well, I prefer to do things this way. I'm not interested in upgrading my technology. So we have issues around that. And of course that affects performance. And of course we want to be continuously improving in the concept of Kaizen. We want to continually improve the way we do things. So if you think about it, performance is actually 2-dimensional. I raise that because this part over here doesn't get talked about very much. So let me illustrate my point. This is a very busy slide, but the point is very clear. 9,000 managers were asked in 3 continents a very simple question. If there was a number 1 job attribute that you wanted from your employees, what would it be? And then what people had to do is simply state what that attribute was. So what you're seeing on your screen is an aggregation of all of that research. And the score at the top, number 1, is the number 1 attribute. Now, I don't want to go through this laboriously. I just want to make a very clear point. Out of 9,000 people, these are the top 10 job attributes. There is not one technical attribute in those top 10. So I'm just trying to make the point that we definitely rate non-job performance, non-job roles, yet our performance systems are not well enough developed to actually look at that. So the 5 conversations can be very effective in actually looking at both job role and non-job role. That's my key point. Now, I might just pause there. I realise we've got about 15 minutes. I'll bring June back in because before I go into talking about the framework, June, any comment or questions that we might have? Oops. Sorry, June, are you there?
Okay, I'm okay.
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, June. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Regarding to the one of the slides that you shared, is particularly the screenshot of the system that you developed. The question is the green online system looks admin heavy. Have you had any feedback about how this compares to their previous performance review paperwork?
Yeah, it's not. In fact, that was the whole reason for designing it. It's HR friendly. What we've actually done is we've taken all the paperwork out. All the role of HR is everyone gets their own portal, so it's really a case of them using the portal. What happens is the employee actually responds to the questions they're going to be asked prior to the conversation. So they go in online, they type in their particular responses, then when they have their conversation with the manager, they're prepared. The manager then goes in and adds his or her comments based on the conversation they've had. And from an HR point of view, it shows you a dashboard about all the issues that have come up and so forth. So it's actually about making your life easier, not actually harder. It's actually a much better process. And instead of chasing people, it's just a click of a button. So it's actually a very useful system, and we designed it for particularly that reason.
Okay, so what you have actually developed is an automated, the performance management process itself.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Tim.
Okay, I'll keep going, and then we'll stop a little bit before the end so that we'll have a few questions to ask there. So let me just make sure I don't get rid of everybody. So turn off your webcam. Okay, so June, you can see the screen now, I assume? Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
And you can also see your reminder, leave for airport.
Good. I thought I'd turn that off. Okay. All right. So, guys, let me have this. Here is the 5 conversations framework. You'll notice that on the left-hand side, there's the months. So we're expecting people to have one 10-minute conversation once a month with their direct reports, and the topics are in the second column. And I'll go through and explain those in a little detail in a moment. The content, which is the third column, is just explaining a little bit around what that topic is about. And the final column is some of the questions, not all of them, but some of the key questions that are asked during that conversation. So I put a lot of thought into the order here so that I didn't just slap this together. I thought very carefully about this, and let me explain the order. A lot of people say to me, surely it could not only be a 10-minute conversation. It is only a 10-minute conversation. It's very targeted, very focused, very relaxed, but nevertheless important. So there's not too many questions to ask. So I'm not suggesting people might want to talk for more than 10 minutes, and sometimes that's a very good thing. But really it's designed to be a 10-minute conversation, which still can be very meaningful and relevant even within 10 minutes. So just imagine your organisation for a minute if everybody is committed to having 10-minute conversations every year about a range of developmental issues. It's inevitable, it's absolutely inevitable that it's going to improve trust, build morale, improve performance, and we'll know that because remember we measure that at the end. So climate review. The climate review, of course, many of us in this broadcast spend lots of money on online engagement surveys, and this conversation can replace that in some respects because instead of doing this online, how about we do it face to face? How about we ask people about their job satisfaction? How about we ask people about the morale? How about we ask people about how they'd rate their communication? Not theirs personally, but in the team and from that team beyond. So it's saving you a lot of money, and it's also just as relevant. People will say to me, yes, but people mightn't be honest in a conversation. They mightn't be, but they mightn't be honest online either. So how do we know for sure? This way, at least, we can delve down and ask questions of clarification. So we have a climate review, which is a very easy starting point in the conversation. Then we move to strengths and talents. So this is based on the positive psychology movement, and it's based on the concept that if we actually talk about strengths first, it creates an upward spiral of positivity, and it also, the whole concept is how about we start with trying to utilize people's talents and strengths for the betterment of the organization. So very much working on a talent management concept here, and this is a much more positive way to actually begin the developmental process. Obviously, at some point in month 3, we've got to talk about what people need to improve on, and these are opportunities for growth. This of the 5 conversations is the most difficult conversation because, people don't like to admit these things, but we've got to have a talk. We have to have a discussion about it at some point. So yes, we do that. And then, of course, you can imagine out of this conversation 2 and 3, there is some developmental opportunities, some learning and development opportunities that fall out of that. Here is your training needs analysis. Instead of us spending lots of time and effort collecting information across the organisation for a training needs analysis, how about we just do it through the conversations? And all of this, remember, is recorded, so the HR person actually has access to all of the, the training needs across the organisation very easily. That's what I meant by the previous question, that it actually makes your life easier. So we have then the final conversation around innovation and continuous improvement. So it's exciting to think that in an organisation, a large organisation with thousands of people, can you imagine how powerful that would be, knowing full well that during, say, this month, the month of April, that there are thousands of conversations going on across the organisation around continuous improvement and innovation. Now, not all the ideas will be great, but many of them will, and that's the point. There'll be some good ideas generated, and there'll be some opportunities to build efficiencies and effectiveness in the business. So you can see why, hopefully, I've designed the structure the way I have. And so the manager's obliged to, and they every month is the corporate conversation month. So April, if you were starting in April, would be the climate review conversation, corporate conversation. And then you would have this one in May, and it would go through. And you might say, well, what happens? Okay, you're talking 10-minute conversations a year. What happens in the other 2 months? You might be able to have a 6th conversation around KPIs. You might be able to have your performance review. If you see this as an enabler, you can use this as an opportunity to improve your capacity to have better performance reviews. Or this could replace your performance review, so you can use it either way. Okay, so I'd like to just sum up there because I think there'll probably be a few questions to answer. So let me just simply talk about the benefits as I see it, to try and wrap all this up for you. So let me just go through this. One of the benefits of the 5 Conversations framework is that it creates an ongoing dialogue, and what that means is that it's, as I said before, it's a change management process. We're actually getting people to talk to each other, which is not something that they're necessarily used to. And I think you'll find, certainly anecdotally, I've found in this part of the world, and in fact in America, where there are quite a few companies taking it on board, company in Iceland, New Zealand, all over the place, what they're finding is that it's building trust levels because people are actually talking. It's bringing, I guess the title of a new book that I'll be bringing out is called Bringing the Human Being Back to Work. So it really does do that. It also means that it creates a more open dialogue and a more direct as well. So you can be open and direct as well. So the questions are there, people are prepared, people are talking about these things. It creates flexibility. So it means that you can do this you can do this in the car, you can do it on a park bench, you can do this in the lunchroom, well, you know, with a fair degree of privacy. You can do this anywhere, so it's not difficult to take the list of questions and go and do this in a coffee shop or anywhere. It's timely because it's, you know, you've got the information at the time, which is really important. And I guess finally, it's more relaxed, it's more fun, it's more effective, and people enjoy it a lot more. So essentially, that's the benefits as I see it. You can purchase my book. It's online. It's in Amazon in Japan. So you certainly have an opportunity to do that. So I might now finish because we'll probably have some questions. I'll put this webcam back on, and June, you probably there's probably a few comments. I know I've gone through all that very quickly, but we've only got an hour, and I respect people's time.
Yes, we do have a lot of questions, but unfortunately, we won't be able to answer them at this webinar. But if I may just ask one last question, and I think this question is very, very good to close this webinar. The question is, many times we are told to build trust, but how can you have trust between someone who has the power to fire you for economic reasons at any time?
Yeah, that's a good question. And of course, people know that. So there's this power relationship that's in workplaces. What I'm trying to do is equalize the relationship. Of course, everybody still knows the boss is the boss and so forth. But by involving and engaging in a series of conversations, we are attempting to humanize the workplace. Of course, and of course, we all know about leadership these days, that leadership is much more of a collaborative exercise, or at least it should be. So this is a vehicle to be able to create a more collaborative leadership style. You can still have hard conversations with people, and you still should, but this is about developing your greatest resource, even though it's a cliche, which of course is your people. So it's about humanizing the workplace, if you like, June.
All right. And with that, thank you very much, Dr. Baker, for your presentation today and for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to all of us today. I'm sure that our participants have learned a lot from you, and we do hope that this webinar is just but a start of an exciting journey in transforming how we do performance management and how we develop our people. Again, on behalf of the JHRS community, a very, very big thank you and all the best. To all of our participants, thank you as well for your active and highly engaged participation in today's webinar. And again, we will be collecting all of your unanswered questions and then send them to Dr. Baker, and then I'm sure that Dr. Baker will be kind enough to respond to those questions, and then we will feed them back to you. And again, as a reminder, we will be sending you a copy of Dr. Baker's presentation as well as the recording of this webinar. So please watch out for this in your email inboxes. And we hope to see you again in one of our upcoming events. But for the meantime, we wish everyone a great